To the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast, coming to you from the Play Draft Studios, with your hosts, Mike Wright, Ben Cummins, and Chris Meaney.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the podcast. This is the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast. I am your overdramatic host, Mike the Fantasy Hitman. Wright, what's going on, party people? It's about to get wild. About to get wild because it's wild card weekend. Ben, you speak when spoken to. Don't interrupt my flow over there, man.
My bad.
Ridiculous. But speaking of Ben, I guess he's on the show today. What's up, Ben Cummins? Good friend.
I'm just so excited for playoff DFS. I've alluded to it. We all have, especially these next 2 weeks where there's 4 games, 2 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday. Just such a fun puzzle to try to put together, as we always talk about. So excited to dive into it.
Absolutely. It's funny how when you have limited options, it seems almost harder to pick out the guys that you really want to get in your lineup.
Yep.
But helping us out with that is our other good friend, good friend, Chris Meaney. What's up, buddy?
What's going on? Yeah, hot start there, Mike. Ben, you relax over there, okay?
Yeah, that was probably my best start ever until Ben Cummins started chiming in.
I thought he was saying, what's up to us? I'm sorry.
Yeah, man, I agree. I echo everything that Ben said, though, in terms of just this is a fun slate, 4 games. It reminds us a little bit of the Thanksgiving slate, right? The one extra contest.
Yes.
And you do have to get a little bit cute when you're playing in tournaments this week. There's going to be a lot of chalky plays that you're going to want to play, but for the most part, you got to get 1 or 2 guys in there. There'll be the difference for you.
So the format of this show, if you're a longtime listener, number one, thank you. Thank you for subscribing to the pod. Hopefully it was a very fruitful and productive season for you. Got you in the green. The format of this show is a little bit different. We're still going to give you a lineup that we have each gone with at the end of the show. But because there are only the 4 games, we are going to go a game-by-game process, break them down, our thought process between if we are liking some teams and liking certain players. So it's not really we break things up into cash or GPPs today, just going through the matchups. So we are going to start right here, Saturday. The Colts are traveling on the road, taking on the Houston Texans. The Texans are favored by 1.5 points. We have a 49 point over-under currently. We are recording on Wednesday afternoon in case the line changes. But let's start on the Colts side of the ball. I'm going to throw it first to Chris Meaney. Colts center Ryan Kelly is ready to go. That's the quote for Saturday. That's a huge uptick for Marlon Mack and Andrew Luck and company. How are you looking at the Indianapolis Colts, Chris?
Yeah, I like the Colts a lot. I love this game. You mentioned the total. It's the highest one on the board, and we're talking about Houston, the highest team implied total, and Indy, the second highest team implied total this week at 23.5. Houston at 24.5, and these two teams played each other twice in the season, 24-21, 34-37. A lot of points scored in both of those ball games, and Luck has had success against this team twice now, and his 2 best fantasy performances of this season came against the Houston Texans. He totaled 863 yards and 6 touchdowns, over 60 fantasy points, just 2 strong performances. You mentioned Ryan Kelly. You're right. It's huge, Mike, to have him back under center, and Luck said it today. I heard him on the broadcast. He was saying the most underrated player on that line is Ryan Kelly, and everything that they have, the success that they've had over the past few weeks, and just altogether this season, a lot to do with that offensive line. So there's a lot to like about this matchup. I think Andrew Luck is my favorite quarterback on the board. And And I love T.Y. Hilton. It's a pair that I'm going to have in a lot of cash contests. I know it's going to be chalky in tournaments, but I have no problem spending up for both of these guys. And the Texans, we've talked about the Texans over the past few weeks. It's just a defense that's really struggled. Strong against the run all year long, but let's not forget Week 16, Nick Foles had almost 500 yards passing and 4 touchdowns against them. Marcus Mariota, Luck, Foles, Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield all managed to hit the 20-point mark in terms of fantasy points since week 12, and nobody has allowed more passing yards to quarterbacks over the last 5 weeks than the Houston Texans. So I think this is a good spot for Luck to continue to have success.
Ben, how are you looking at Marlon Mack, who has either been 1,000 yards or barely hits around that 30 mark, and you have a team that is very strong against the run? The past 6 weeks, the Houston Texans rank number 1 against fantasy running backs. How are you handling Marlon Mack and Nyheim Hines? Are you interested in one or both or neither?
It makes it tough because, like you said, the Texans, like you both have talked about, the Texans are much harder to run on than throw on. So I'm with Meaney that I think that this is an Andrew Luck game. He'll continue his success. It's hard because I still want to like Marlon Mack because of all of the opportunities that he's been getting. He's 13th in the league in opportunities per game. And he's in that Andrew Luck-led offense. And again, this is, as Meaney talked about, this is the game where we want to start and, kind of build our foundation for this weekend. But at the same time, Marlon Mack doesn't see a ton of targets. That's where kind of like as you brought up his name, I'm sure Mike Nyheim Hines comes into play. He gets more of the targets. So that puts Nyheim Hines on that tournament radar. Still think that it's reaching a little bit because Mac's going to be the guy, but I just don't see this being a spot, especially on the road, where this is a Mac blow-up game like we saw a couple weeks ago at home against Dallas. I think this sets up for more of a passing game shootout on both sides of the ball because you also see Lamar Miller, who gets a ton of volume, but he's been up and down. He's been a little bit injured, and the Colts defense has been pretty solid this year as well. So I see this being a spot where we see much more passing success, and that's where we want to kind of start our teams because we have the Colts who lead all teams in this slate in points scored on the year, 433. The Texans are middle of the pack, but at the same time, they get to be at home in this spot and face a Colts defense that's been pretty solid, but at the same time have allowed the third most points on this entire slate and only 4 fewer than the Eagles, who have allowed the most. So all the reasons Meaney touched on, see this being a high-scoring game. And because of that, you can look at Mac and Lamar Miller. That's why they're written up in the tournament article. They're just not my favorite plays because, again, I'm looking to try to get contrarian, as we talk about a lot on this podcast, at receiver in some spots.
Yeah, that's where I wanted to go.
Exactly.
T.Y. Hilton has absolutely just melted the faces of the Houston Texans secondary. 115 yards in week 4, 199 yards in week 14. So, and T.Y. Hilton, monitor his health, but this has kind of been what he's been doing all year, just not practicing with that ankle injury. Still coming out and putting up huge games. But so Hilton's great. We all agree with that. Mm-hmm. But Chris Meaney, give me that secondary option. Is it Dontrell Inman, who has kind of been sneaky the last 2 weeks, 4 for 46, 5 for 77, a touchdown in both of those games? Is it Inman? Is it somebody else? Who are you interested in if you're going to do that pivot? Chester Rogers? Who do you like?
You guys mentioned Hines, if you look at the game log in the 2 games against Houston, 16 targets, 12 catches in those 2 games. One stands out in particular. Week 4 was no Mac. He had 11 targets and 9 catches. Right. I think what Ben said in a tournament, you could get by with him racking up a few catches, especially if Mac does struggle on the ground to have success. But yeah, Mike, it's Dontrell Inman who's okay. You're right. You mentioned the last 2 weeks. He's certainly trending up. Has yet to play Houston this season. Was not playing in those 2 football games earlier in the year. But he's certainly trending. You mentioned the last 2 games, even before that, 6 for 14. Like the 14 yards, sure, but 6 targets, 4 targets before that, 40 yards, 6 targets before that, 34. So he's getting some usage. He's getting some play inside the red zone as well, where he's had a couple of his touchdowns most recently. So I do have some interest in him at $4,300. I wouldn't go that way in cash, but I do think it's a viable option, something to think about for sure in tournaments. Chester Rogers, I can't really get behind. I know he's got some usage as well, 10 catches in his last 2 games, but I think there's more upside in Inman just because of that usage inside the red zone.
I think we can
all agree. You like the other 2?
No. I'm agreeing with Meaney that I think those are the 2 guys, Inman and Rogers, and I agree. I like Inman a lot too. If you go back to weeks 12 and 13, Inman, before he got hurt and missed week 14, was pretty clearly the wide receiver 2, 67% and 71% of the offensive snaps. Now that correlated though, which is why we have to throw Rodgers in there as a tournament play, because that correlated with Rodgers getting hurt in week 13. Now that he's been healthy over the last couple of weeks, he's playing at about the same snap percentage as Dontrell Inman. But Inman's been the one getting it done, taking advantage of his opportunity. So I like him as well.
And Eric Ebron is in a smash spot here, $5,200 on DraftKings, which is a considerable savings compared to the top price tight end Zach Ertz. But I don't. It's going to be really hard to get away from Eric Ebron the way that I've been handling my lineup building. The Houston Texans, the last 6 weeks, 32nd against fantasy tight ends. All right, let's talk the Houston Texans side of the ball. Ben, Deshaun Watson, where is he coming in for you in terms of ranking the quarterbacks this week? Like, based off his salary and what you're projecting, are you gravitating towards Watson or away from him?
I'm gravitating towards him. And again, this is the game for me. So if I can afford it, which it is kind of tough. So I think that's why, to a certain extent, T.Y. Hilton it is a little bit of a tournament option, because I want DeAndre Hopkins, I want Zeke, and we'll get into all that, but it's hard to pay for all these guys. But if you can get that construction, which I think I've found it, so for the most part, so we'll talk about it when we get to the lineups. I want one of these quarterbacks. I'm with Meaney that I slightly prefer Andrew Luck, but at the same time, Deshaun Watson is the home quarterback, and that gives him a little bit of a boost, in my opinion, because I always like to side with that, especially in the playoffs. So slightly Luck, but it's very neck and neck for me with these guys, especially because we see Watson recently, and obviously it remains to be seen if this continues. But the last couple weeks, he's really found success and upside with his legs, as we know he can always do. 115 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns over the past 2 weeks. We know what he can do through the air. It's the one concern is, and the reason why I absolutely want to lock in DeAndre Hopkins, because he doesn't have a ton of weapons right now. And Hopkins has just continued to ball out because he's seen double-digit targets in 5 straight games. He's gone over 100 yards in 3 straight. We know how good he is. But with Will Fuller going down, Demaryius Thomas going down, there's not a ton of weapons for him. That's why we're talking about the DeAndre Carter and Vincent Smiths of the world. But at the same time, just like we're talking about with Dontrell Inman, Kiki QT is a full participant in practice the last couple of days, and I've been saying I'll believe it when I see it. But now that he's putting full participation practices together this early in the week, it sounds like he's going to play, and he instantly, for me, becomes a tournament option right off the bat in this solid game, because we've seen him come back from injuries multiple times this year and have successful fantasy games, even some big fantasy games. I don't see them with their limited depth chart, playing it that safe with him. So I see Kiki QT getting thrown right back out there. I think he's a pretty good player when healthy. Obviously, we have to hope that the hamstring holds up. But if it does, that's another boost for Deshaun Watson as well to give him a little bit more upside. So feeling Watson a lot. Obviously, just talked about Hopkins, and I think Kiki QT is a very interesting tournament option.
All right, Meaney, let's talk about the running back. It's Lamar Miller or bust for the Houston Texans. A couple weeks back, when it looked like Alfred Blue was going to be in a sneaky situation, we ended up with Deontay Foreman running the ball 7 times for -1 yards.
Yeah, good. Thanks for coming out.
So, but thankfully, Lamar Miller came back week 17 against Jacksonville, finished strong, 17 for 56 with a touchdown. He's matched up against the Colts, who the past 6 weeks are 12th against fantasy running backs. How's Lamar Miller ranking for you, Meaney?
Yeah, not high.
Okay.
Not high at all. I think, a contrarian play, perhaps, on DraftKings, that $4,900 salary is really nice, but he's really touchdown dependent. He is. I mean, he's only averaging 69 rushing yards per game. You look at the 2 games that he had against the Colts, 14 for 33 earlier in the season, 14 for 49. Like, that's not really appealing. 4.9 DraftKings points. and then 16.2 he had against the Colts. Now, he did find the end zone there, had the touchdown. He had 6 targets and 5 catches in that game, which were both season highs for him, and I think that has to do with just the fact that they were not able to run on this defense. So slight interest in tournaments, but definitely not in cash. I think the way to attack both of these quarterbacks are just going to be able to have their way through the air. I mean, on this slate, the worst team against the pass is the Colts, according to Football Outsiders and Pass DVOA. They're the worst on this slate. So I like the QT call. And he had his coming out party earlier in the season against the Colts, week 4, 15 targets, 11 catches, and over 109 yards. So I almost want to suggest him in cash because there's a safe floor, but there definitely is a risk because we haven't seen him in so long. But I just have to stay clear of all the running backs inside this game. I think if you're playing Lamar Miller, you're really just counting on a touchdown. And in around that price range, I think there's some better options that we'll talk about. Now,
is Jordan Thomas tight end for Houston? Is he on your realm of super sneaky tight ends at all?
Nah, not really.
All right, just checking because the Colts are bad against the tight end.
The Colts are. You're right. They are bad. And if you go look at Jordan Thomas's game log, the couple games that stand out, one in particular came against the Colts.
Yeah, 4 for 31.
But other than that, it's been, 1 target, 1 catch. And with some of these guys like QT coming back into the lineup, I think that hurts a guy like Thomas.
The absolute extreme boring play is Ryan Griffin, but he does get a ton of playing time. So he's, has potential for 4 catches in this game. The other one, though, if we're talking super sneaky, I think is maybe Jordan Akins. It's a huge reach, but it's a tournament reach in this game because actually if you look at the playing time, Jordan Thomas's playing time has been trending down. Jordan Akins has been going up a little bit. So,
it's a good note.
Yes. Yeah.
Chris Meaney, who do you have winning this game?
I like the Colts.
Ben?
I like the Colts win.
I've got the Texans.
Oh, interesting. I have the Colts.
You gonna split it?
I have the Colts as well. And that helps me when I'm making my decisions. I look at these games and I'm figuring out who's going to win. So let's say you're looking at Marlon Mack or Lamar Miller. I'm going to take the running back who I think is going to win. So just another look into the process. Next game, the Seattle Seahawks travel to Dallas to take on the Cowboys. The Cowboys are a 1.5-point favorite. A 43.5-point over-under has been established. Let's start with the road team. How are we looking at this Seattle offense, Chris Meaney? Russell Wilson, pass attempts dropped by, I think, about 100 over the course of the season. Hasn't stopped him from putting up solid fantasy games. But do you actually want to play Russell Wilson against this Cowboys defense that's actually sneaky good against the pass?
Yeah, sneaky good and just phenomenal at home too. 7-1 at home, and Seattle 4-4 on the road. I have some interest in Russell Wilson in tournaments, but much like we were talking about the game before in quarterbacks, this is the game to attack the running backs here. And Wilson has been really efficient this season. Good on him to have some help in the offense because it was all him. At one point, I think he had like 95% of the team's touchdowns last season heading into the final weeks of the year. And this year he's had some success with Chris Carson. And Chris Carson, 8 rushing touchdowns in his final 9 games. He's
been a beast.
He's been such a beast, really. 447 yards over his final 4 weeks. Only Derrick Henry has more rushing yards than him over that span, at least 19 carries and 90 yards in those 4 games. So I just think that they're going to continue to run the football and lean on Carson. And he had a good game against Dallas earlier in the year. He had 32 carries against them. He touched the ball 34 times in that contest, had over 100 yards, found the end zone. So I like Chris Carson. That's kind of where I go when I'm looking at this game is him and Zeke. And I think you can get by with playing Russell. I think there could be some points scored in this football game. 43.5 is the second highest total on the board. You look at Seattle, 20.5, Dallas, 21.5, the team implied totals. It's fairly high when you're looking at what we'll talk about on Sunday. So I think for Russell Wilson, definitely going to be able to save yourself some cash on DraftKings. He's $1,000 cheaper than Deshaun Watson. Over on FanDuel, it's the same thing. It's $800 cheaper. So you can get by with saving yourself a little bit of cash on both sites, but I'm just looking at that running back position in Seattle.
So is just the follow-up to the running backs, Chris Carson, very interested. Mike Davis, Rashad Penny as a real contrarian tournament play. Do you have any interest in rolling with those guys?
No, I don't really. I just think it's been so much Carson. If I was to choose one, Mike, I guess it would be Davis.
Okay.
Just because I've seen him a little bit more recently and getting some usage. I mean, he had 8 catches 3 games ago in a game against San Fran, but I just think Carson has been such a workhorse that I think it's going to continue to be him. And he had a game 3 weeks ago where he had 6 targets and 6 catches, so it's not like he's going to come out on third downs every single time if they get into that situation.
All right, Ben. Talk about the wide receivers. Doug Baldwin. Who the heck is Doug Baldwin? We have an absolute crap toast sandwich from Doug Baldwin, where right in the middle we thought we were getting something special, but then you bit all the way through and you got right back to the turd bread. How are you handling Doug Baldwin and Tyler Lockett?
Well, I love that you talked about your process because I'm the exact same way. I think that when we have, fewer games, it makes it so much easier to attack game by game. So I love that we break down these podcasts for the playoffs like this because that's a huge part of my process too. And in this game, I've got the Seahawks winning. I'm rolling with Russell Wilson. And so because of that, I'm also on board with Chris Carson on the other side of the ball. I think it's super tough to fade Zeke. So, want to lock both of those guys in. Meaney talked about it too. I think that right there is the thought process that most people will have. So rather than getting contrarian with a Mike Davis or a Rashad Penny, I think when you look at this slate and you look at the games on Sunday, which we'll get to, and you realize that there's not a ton of fantasy greatness out there in those games, Russell Wilson and exposure to him is that way to get contrarian with them being on the road. And, there is fear in this game. And that's what makes it, not a lock, but an interesting tournament pivot because both of these teams do have a ton of success running the ball and should. And so because of that, if they grind out first down after first down and that clock keeps running, there will be limited chances for the offenses as we've already seen with Russell Wilson this year. But what Russell Wilson has shown us is that he can get it done being extremely efficient, just being such a great player. So if you're going to buy into a contrarian thought process, let's buy into a guy that's proven it in the playoffs that I think absolutely can win this game, and that is Russell Wilson. And so obviously tying that together would be Doug Baldwin and Tyler Lockett. And, on a week-to-week basis, it's been really tough to predict. As you're talking about, Mike, it looks like Doug Baldwin's all the way back, and now Tyler Lockett's catching another touchdown last week. Baldwin's not doing much. So tough to predict, but at the end of the day, I could see a Russell Wilson, Doug Baldwin, or Russell Wilson, Tyler Lockett stack winning tournaments. And so I am highly interested in that thought process. And it's basically pick your poison. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to overreact too much to week 17 as long as Doug Baldwin, who's not practicing on Tuesday, so I don't know if there's been an update for today, as long as he's fine, they've used maintenance for him in his knee all year. As long as he's out there, he's good to go. That's where I'm looking, just because what we did see in weeks 15 and 16, after I believe he rested in weeks 14, showed me he's healthy enough. He's making those insane catches here and there, and he could do that again in that primetime matchup on Saturday, just like he did a couple weeks ago. Granted, the Seahawks were at home against the Lions in this same slate on Wild Card Weekend. He's proven it. Both of those guys have proven it. I'm interested in that thought process for tournaments, rolling with Russell Wilson and his pass catchers.
Listen, I think Baldwin could be, the tournament option, the guy who wins you, the slate because of his touchdown upside. I know Lockett has scored some touchdowns, but Baldwin's got the 5 touchdowns in his final 6 games. But for Lockett, he's just been consistent, like double-digit fantasy points in 14 of his 16 games. Now, again, I know that has a lot to do with his 10 touchdowns, but at least 50 yards in 11 games this season. You cannot say that about Doug Baldwin at all. So even though Lockett's only getting 5 or 6 targets here and there and catching 3 or 4 balls, the routes that he runs, the ability to take one to the house or the yards after the catch, like he's among the leaders that we've seen since he's entered the league. It's just a matter of staying healthy and being productive. His hands are great. He runs great routes. So I think there's a little bit of a safety there with Lockett. Plus he's cheaper. And I think the upside lies with Baldwin. I think you could get him at maybe a lower more ownership.
That's what's been so incredible with Lockett, though, is because, you can make the argument for Baldwin because lately, now that he's healthy, he's getting more volume, and I always want to roll with volume. But to your point, Meaney, Lockett has gotten it done on limited volume just by being Russell Wilson, by being extremely efficient all year. And you can see him doing that again in this spot. So a good tournament option for sure.
On the Dallas side of the ball, I think this is very interesting to kind of project how the script is going to roll out for the Cowboys, because I think that the way that they win, and by the way, I do think that Dallas wins this game, it's going to be on the back of Ezekiel Elliott. The Seahawks are very susceptible to the running backs. There's already the talk out of Dallas coming out that Zeke is preparing for the biggest workload of the season.
Oh boy.
He got to rest up that final game. I mean, 25 carries to me is not outside of the realm of possibilities for Ezekiel Elliott, and that's why he's $9,000 over on DraftKings, $1,300 more than second highest priced Melvin Gordon. Chris Meaney, is Zeke forced into your lineup, or are you still finding guys that you like enough that you can sometimes pivot away from him, or is he in every one of your lineups?
He's not in every single one. I'll tell you what, he's in all my cash lineups. Okay. There's a game this season where he touched the ball 40 times. 40 times. Right. And I don't think you can say that about any other back. So I'll play a few tournament lineups. I'll leave him out of a couple just in case. Right?
But you're talking 90 plus percent.
I'm talking 90. Yeah, okay. I'm talking he's in there. He's locked in and ready to go.
All right. So is that the way you're projecting this as well, which has you wanting to stay away from Dak and the passing game?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I think it's going to be a lot of Zeke. You could get, again, we've talked about this before, maybe, especially with Zeke. I mean, top 5 in targets and catches, career high for him. He passed that in week 9. He's had a couple games this season where he's had receiving touchdowns from Dak. There is a possibility you can go that way. If you play multiple lineups and tournaments, that could be a contrarian way to go, maybe Dak and Zeke, but sometimes that caps your upside fully, especially when they get inside the red zone. If Dak is calling his own number, maybe Zeke doesn't get that red zone rushing attempt, but I don't think it matters because, like you said, he's just going to get a ton of volume. So I think that I'm with Ben. I think Seattle wins this game. It's going to be close, but the reason I lean Seattle is because of the experience and inexperience and some of the things I've seen from Dak over the past couple weeks and some of the mistakes that he's made. But I think you're right. And just in terms of this guy getting a ton of volume, it's just really hard to fade him.
Ben, what's your interest level in Amari Cooper?
Not very high. I mean, not very high.
He's just so expensive.
Right, exactly.
Since the game where he went over 203, his follow-up to that masterpiece has been 32 yards, 20 yards, 31 yards, and that included 11 targets in Week 17. So don't buy into, it was Week 17, they were probably resting. No, Amari Cooper got his full target share and still ended that game 5 for 31. He's at home. Amari Cooper splits at home are favorable. He is favored to win the game, or his team is favored. His splits when he's favored are also very, very favorable, but you could have said that about the last few games as well, and he's been an absolute crap fest. So, Ben, you're very low on Amari Cooper.
Just paying up at wide receiver in general is tough in a spot like this where we've talked about how we see both rushing offenses having success and there's limited opportunities. Yeah, you can get contrarian, take a chance on Russell Wilson and a cheap Tyler Lockett, Doug Baldwin, who's not too expensive like we've talked about. But going that high, Amari Cooper is very, very expensive. And that's going to force you to have to maybe not play Zeke or maybe not play T.Y. Hilton. Maybe you have to fade Nuke. And those are options that I feel way better about. And I was just going to hop on the Ezekiel Elliott train because it doesn't matter whether I'm right or wrong, whether Seattle wins or not, because Dallas is at home and I can see them winning. Playing Zeke, you're not in trouble because he is independent. It doesn't matter what the game situation is. He is going to ball out. He saw 26.6 opportunities per game this year, which is more than 2.5 more than second best Todd Gurley. So yes, Mike, if Dallas has success and they win 25 carries, he could have that easily. If they lose, we've seen it. Zeke could have 10 catches and it won't matter because he could have 10 for 80. Yeah. And even if he gets 60 yards rushing and finds a touchdown in there, he still blows up. So for me, 100% Zeke, just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And then I'm going to find those stud receivers elsewhere in games I like better, as we've already talked about, or I'm going to try to get cheap exposure elsewhere. And Cooper just doesn't fall into the process for me because he's too expensive and he's not in the game that I like from a passing perspective if you're going to pay up that much.
Listen, I will say this. In my lineups, the couple that I have faded Zeke, I have went that way with Dak and Cooper, just in case it turns out to be that way, right? It does. Sure. If Zeke doesn't have his phenomenal ceiling game, then there's a chance that Cooper has that game. And Mike, you're talking about the struggles recently, but obviously we know that the upside does have a ceiling, a tournament winning upside. We've seen it a couple times in his career.
Speaking of upside, Chris Meaney, how about my boy Blake Jarwin?
What a call.
A week too late. A week too late for me.
I know, right? Unbelievable. And you know what?
Insane.
It's not just last week. Now, last week he had the 8 targets, 7 catches, 3 touchdowns. And you're right. You look at the last 4 games, and that's the one bad game, Mike, that he had against Tampa Week 16. But before that, 7 targets, 4 catches, 45 yards. The week before that, which was really his coming out party when he played against the Eagles, he had 7 catches on 7 targets for 56 yards. So he is trending up, and I'm interested in him for sure.
Ben, are you interested in my boy, Blake Jarwin?
Yeah.
All
because
right.
like you talked about, we're not just looking at 119 yards and 3 touchdown game. He's had some other 8 target, 7 target games in there recently as well. And it kind of comes back to the Zeke thing. Like Blake Jarwin did that, and it's not, it's week 17. No, the Cowboys played their starters. Yep. The only person they sat was Zeke because they're planning to ride him to 40 touches again this week. But Jarwin was out there with all the starters. He did all that. So at a cheap price at home. And again, the game, Meaney's talking about it from the Cowboys perspective. I'm kind of throwing it out there from the Seahawks perspective. Either way, this kind of is that sneaky game for me that, whoever's offense performs better than we think, that could ride some people to, tournament championships and winning thousands of dollars.
Before we jump into Sunday's matchups, want to thank today's sponsor, Pristine Auction. Pristine Auction, the best sports memorabilia website of all time. That's where I'm getting all my signed gear. We love DeAndre Hopkins. You know how much I love him. So much that I went to Pristine and I got myself a signed DeAndre Hopkins. This thing, it's the alternate red. It's incredible. It is glowing. And I know that the hands of DeAndre Hopkins signed this jersey because they use the absolute best authenticators in the business. I'm staring right at that JSA certification. And then you're getting deals all the time. Hundreds of new auctions up every single day on Pristine Auction. Make a completely free account. That's free. You want to bid on something? That's free too. None of this bogus. You got to pay to bid. You only pay if you win, and you're going to get a good price. Check it out, pristineauction.com, Pristine auction.com. And if you make that free account, let them know that the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast sent you. On the Sunday slate, the Los Angeles Chargers, the 12-4 Los Angeles Chargers, travel to the 10-6 Baltimore Ravens. No, it's not fair, but this is where we are. The Ravens are favored by 2.5 points. We have a 41.5 point over-under. Melvin Gordon, who was out there in unnecessary playing time the previous week in Week 17, injured his knee, but he says he'll play on Sunday. Chris Meaney, do you believe that Melvin Gordon will play, and do you believe that he is a good play against Baltimore, the second-ranked defense against fantasy running backs?
I do believe he will play, but yeah, no, I don't think he's a strong play. I would not think about him at all in cash. And yeah, I mean, the Ravens, the fewest points allowed. I mean, the third fewest fantasy points to running backs, to wide receivers. This defense is phenomenal. So You know what? I got more interest in Austin Eckler, to be honest with you, in tournaments than I do with Melvin Gordon. I'm kind of staying clear of this whole Chargers team. The last time we saw them, it was only 2 weeks ago when these two teams played each other. That Week 16 matchups, the Chargers hit a season low in points scored with 10, total yards 198, passing yards 147, the second fewest rushing yards they've had all year in 51, and the second most giveaways they had in a game at 3. So, I mean, I'm not feeling this Chargers team at all this week. And the Ravens had a ton of success getting after Phillip Rivers. They had a couple turnovers, as I mentioned, sacked him 4 times. So for Melvin Gordon, it's a complete risk play, and I would only suggest in tournaments, and that's just to be a little different from the pack.
Ben, how are you handling the Los Angeles Chargers? Now, we know that the Ravens are beatable, sort of beatable, at the tight end position, 22nd in the past 6 weeks. Hunter Henry could be back.
I didn't hear that from Stephen A. Smith.
We have a quote from Anthony Lynn who says Hunter Henry will be on a pitch count if active on Sunday. Do you have any interest in old man Gates or young man Henry, Ben?
I might have a little bit of interest in Hunter Henry if he's back out there. But it's
that's
just
$2,500 on DraftKings, and probably only going to play in red zone packages. Maybe only red zone packages.
$2,500 first game. It's just so hard. This game in general is mad to me, and it's frustrating because I want to like the Chargers a lot. They've scored the second most points on this slate, tied with the Seahawks, only 5 points behind the Colts. Very good offense. Love Keenan Allen. Melvin Gordon should play. Phillip Rivers, but it's so hard to want to play any of these guys because they're on the road against a Ravens defense that allowed, or just team in general, that allowed 287 points. That's only 4 more than the Bears, who've just absolutely been incredible. Both of these defenses have been. So it's really hard to like anybody. You can, have the same conversation that absolutely makes them a contrarian offense. And if you're going to get contrarian, again, an offense that has proven it basically all year is a fine way to do it. Keenan Allen's a little bit more affordable than he has been. I think, DraftKings,
I would play him over Cooper.
Looking at the matchup.
Yes.
Yeah. He's a little bit more affordable, gives you a little bit more flexibility, and still believe in Keenan Allen no matter the matchup. But it's still tough because he's still a little bit pricey there. Other than that, it's hard to believe in Melvin Gordon at all, even though he's had the volume all year, because, again, he's getting injured again in Week 17. Meaning, I'm with you. If I was looking at anybody, which honestly I'm really not, Eckler's intriguing because he has upside catching passes and comes back in Week 17 and looks pretty good and has about 58 and a touchdown on 8 carries. So, but again, and the bigger picture real quick, as I've touched on last year, when there's 4 games, I know it's very easy to feel like, oh man, I have to get exposure to every game. But usually in these 2 rounds of the playoffs, I usually find a game that I just don't pick anybody from because I feel like it's going to be more of a playoff defensive-minded atmosphere. And this is the one right now in the lineup I'm about to give out at the end of the show. I have nobody in this game, I don't think, and I'm perfectly fine with that.
Yeah, I'm actually the same. I don't have anyone in this game either.
I don't think.
Hey, let me double check.
Mike, you mentioned
nobody in the game.
Allen.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Keenan Allen, and I think, you learn a lot from playing a team that you didn't have success from. At least, you should anyways. And I'm sure that's what Phillip Rivers is looking at the tape. You look at his last 4 games, 220 or fewer in passing yards in 3 of those 4 games, 4 touchdowns, 6 interceptions in those 4 games. I mentioned just Baltimore having success. Like they could not stop that Ravens pass rush in that game. So I think some quick throws to Keenan Allen, to Gordon if he's healthy. That's why I liked Austin Eckler just a little bit. Mention his name as somebody who's, I think Phillip Rivers is going to have to get that ball out quickly.
Yeah.
And it's going to have to come quick. And I think that's why you mentioned Keenan Allen as somebody in the slot who can, rack up 10 catches.
And to speak to that, Mike Williams and Tyrell Williams combined for 19 receiving yards against the Baltimore Ravens last time they played. And correct me if I'm wrong, as the Baltimore game, this was right after the Kansas City goose egg for Keenan Allen. So he was coming off of the injury. Right. We weren't exactly sure what he was going to do. And he still put up 8 targets, 5 for 58. And we have to assume that Keenan Allen is healthier in this game than he was in that contest. Go ahead, Ben.
Yep, that's exactly what I was going to say. You look at his stat line, you're like, oh, that's not very exciting. This is a tough spot. But yes, you have to remember he was coming back 1 week after getting hurt the week before. So to completely agree with you, Mike. You can build that narrative that he's healthier now. He could have a bigger game. So yeah, Allen's definitely on the radar for sure.
All right, let's move it over to the Baltimore Ravens side of the ball. Lamar Jackson has been an absolute sensation for this team, picking up the dead carcass that was the Baltimore Ravens and carried them into the I almost called it the fantasy playoffs, like they give a crap. Brings them into the NFL playoffs, but he did it on the back of the running game between Lamar Jackson, Gus Edwards, and Kenneth Dixon. Chris, how are you handling Gus Edwards and Kenneth Dixon? The snap counts it's hard to get a grasp on just exactly what the plan is for the Baltimore Ravens, because Kenneth Dixon was rising in the snap total, Gus Edwards was going down, but then we have this past week where Kenneth Dixon plummeted down to a 28.6% of the snaps, despite having an absolute monster game. To be fair, Gus Edwards did as well. So between the two, how are you looking at those two guys?
Yeah, it's definitely a committee. It certainly is, even if the snap counts are favoring Edwards since he's taken over. He's got the 7 starts. He's had at least 67 rushing yards in 7 of those starts, 90-plus in 4 games. He had 14 carries and 92 yards against the Chargers in that game I was talking about, Week 14. I think he's the safer play. I really do. In terms of DraftKings, they're right on par with each other. I mean, $4,200 for Edwards and Dixon is $4,000. And, you go look over on FanDuel and you're paying up for Gus Edwards $7,200 and Kenneth Dixon's at $6,800. So again, pretty close, but it's still expensive to the point where I don't want any of them really. But no. And Edwards in cash, sure, I'd play him in cash because I feel like they're not going to change their style. This is what they are now. Baltimore has turned things over completely from Flacco to one of the teams that threw the ball more than anybody. And you look at Jackson, who leads the league in rushing yards, who is 6-1 as a starter, and his only loss came in Kansas City. They've had success winning football games with running the football, and that's what they want to do. Dixon, lean his way in tournaments because of what he can do in the air. He has at least a catch in 5 games, where Gus Edwards has 1 catch in those 7 games. So I think there's slightly more upside in Dixon, but I think it's Edwards who gets the start. And if anything happens where he struggles, they could turn things over to Dixon. But I think both of these guys are going to be involved. I think they can both touch the ball 10 to 15 times each. This is what Baltimore wants to do. They want to run the football, rely on their defense, kick field goals, and that's how they're going to win the football game. So it's just not totally appealing to me because I just don't feel like there's going to be a lot of points. But if I were to lean one of them, I think the safer play is Gus Edwards.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm with Ben that I don't particularly love anyone want anyone from this game, but I have that internal fight, that internal struggle with believing that Gus Edwards or Kenneth Dixon, one of those guys, will be a shift, an actual shift when it comes to this slate, because that's how you can beat the Chargers. I mean, this is a bad mixture for Los Angeles. The place they can be beat is the place that Baltimore is, in fact, the strongest.
Right.
Ben, how are you handling the wide receivers from Baltimore?
Yeah,
not playing them. Moving on.
They're all so cheap too.
I don't even want to talk about that. I'm not interested, but I will just kind of piggyback off what you said, Mike. Even though I just poo-pooed this game, I think the Ravens win. I think they do it with defense and how they've been having success rushing the ball. So the 2 guys I'm interested in are Lamar Jackson, just because he has so much upside running the football. We saw that last week. And then deciding between the 2 running backs, I do have kind of a preference, and it's Kenneth Dixon. As Meaney just talked about, there's more upside in the receiving game. And yes, Lamar Jackson's not, throwing to his running backs a ton, but there is a little bit of upside there. And Dixon's a guy that I've always just thought has been pretty talented. He's coming off of a 117-yard rushing performance with limited playing time. a little bit cheaper, although the prices have basically gotten right the same. But again, over the last 2 weeks, Gus Edwards, 27 opportunities, Kenneth Dixon, 24. So as Meaney touched on, this basically is a full-on timeshare. And I'm going to go with the guy I prefer more, which is Kenneth Dixon. So that I completely agree with you, Mike, that this slate could be shifted with Kenneth Dixon having a big game or Lamar Jackson having a big game running the football, because since Lamar Jackson has been named the starter, 119 carries for 556 yards and 4 touchdowns over that 7-week span. So, he's ridiculous. He's cheaper. He's at home. If he has another 100-yard rushing game or another 2 touchdowns on the ground, plus what he'll give you through the air, he could be a winner here. So not my favorite plays, but plays that I want to have some exposure to in tournaments and guys that I could see shifting the slate.
It's crazy. Like Lamar Jackson's FanDuel is really sharp this week. Lamar Jackson's the second highest priced quarterback on FanDuel. He's $200 more than Andrew Luck, wow, which is phenomenal. Like I still can't believe it. And then you go look on DraftKings, and there's 5 other quarterbacks that are more expensive than Lamar.
They have Rivers above Lamar Jackson.
Right.
Which way.
Rivers, which is because Lamar Jackson's hit at least 16 fantasy points in every start he's taken over. Like that's a solid floor because of what Ben's talking about, his rushing ability. He's running the ball a ton. And even his worst game rushing came against the Chargers a couple weeks ago, 39 rushing yards. That's still like starting with a touchdown. It's a free touchdown right there.
And again, you look at Russell Wilson as a potential tournament option because he's even cheaper than Lamar Jackson, which his price is a little off to me as well.
At the tight end position for Baltimore, real quick, it's an absolute mess. Mark Andrews has been surging a little bit as of late for the last couple games, having himself, 85 or so, 83 yards and a touchdown, 54 this past week 17. The problem is when you look over on DraftKings, there he is, Mark Andrews, $3,500. Priced $200 above my guy Blake Jarwin. It is just there's no way I'm paying up for Mark Andrews. If I'm gonna buy a tight end from Baltimore, I'm going with somebody cheap. But even that, can we agree we're hands off on the tight ends for Baltimore?
Yeah,
I'm with you.
I agree too. And even over on FanDuel, Mike, same thing. Andrews is more expensive than Jarwin.
It just is
very tough to trust.
Makes no sense. All right, the final game of the slate. The Philadelphia Eagles travel to Chicago to take on the Bears. Oh, Chris Meaney, I know you don't like this. The Bears are 6-point favorites, almost a full touchdown in the playoffs. A 41.5-point over-under. Chris Meaney, defend your Eagles. How are they possibly going to win this game? What are they doing on offense?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to do much on offense. To
I told you to defend them.
The way that they're going to win this game, and I think they have a legitimate shot actually to win this game, is because of Mitch Trubisky and let's just look at Trubisky in his first few games of the season. He averaged 42 rushing yards over his first 7 games of the season, 15-6 touchdown to interception ratio. Over his last 7 games, he's averaging 17 rushing yards. He's got 9 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. He's been held to under 200 yards passing in 4 of his past 7 games. Chicago has scored 24 points in 4 straight games, 14 in San Fran, 15 against the Rams. This is not an offense that's trending up, and it's a defense in Philadelphia that's actually trending up. And this is why the Eagles had success last season. Yeah, we can joke about Nick Foles all we want, but it was the fact that the defense was able to create turnovers and takeaways. And over their first 7 games of this season, 7 takeaways. And in the last 6 games, the Eagles defense starting to get a little bit more healthier. Jordan Hicks is key to stopping the run, only allowed 30 rushing yards in their last 2 games. Compared to when he was out, 3 games that he missed, 3 backs had over 100 yards, and that hadn't happened all year long. In fact, the only backs to have over 100 yards against them on the ground was Barkley and Zeke. So it was a team that has had success over the past couple of years stopping the run, and now with Jordan Hicks back and a couple other guys, I think that they can have success stopping Jordan Howard. But the only way that they're going to be able to beat Chicago is if Trubisky turns the ball over, and this is his first playoff game. In fact, this is a first playoff game for a lot of Bears on that team, including their head coach Matt Nagy. So it's going to be tough for them to go into Philadelphia and score points. But I think I'm very interested, in fact, in their defense. Both of these defenses, I think, 1 and 2 for me. We're talking about Baltimore being strong as well, but I love the discount that you're going to get it on Philadelphia, and I think they can go in and do some damage on Trubisky.
Ben, how are you looking at the running back position for Philadelphia? Josh Adams had secured that workhorse role for 2 games, and then Darren Sproles returned, and now we're back into the timeshare, including Mr. Wendell Smallwood in there as well. Are you paying for any of these Philadelphia running backs?
So tough to trust because, like you said, now all of a sudden Wendell Smallwood's back in there and getting a ton of runs. So, no, I'm not interested in any of them. I think if you're looking at anyone, it would be Sproles because I see the Eagles having to throw to find success in this game. And I'm picking the Bears. I think this game sets up so nicely for the Bears. Meaney, I'm rooting with you. Having moved to Philadelphia, I've adapted the Eagles as my NFC team, but I don't think it's going to happen. The Bears have been so good. I just see this just kind of setting up not only for their defense, but for their offense as well, which we'll get to. But because of that, really not interested in any. So we've talked about it. Ezekiel Elliott, Chris Carson, those are the main 2. And then, then we move it over to the Bears, where I think that's kind of the fun discussion at running back. So as far as the Eagles go, really not interested in their running back situation. Not really interested in too many of their players on offense, but I will tell you there is one that I'm intrigued by, and it's similar to the thought process with Blake Jarwin of going cheap tight end on this slate. And I think if the Eagles offense is going to find some success, I think they are going to need to utilize those 2 tight end sets. And Dallas Goedert has been getting a lot of playing time lately. They found a way to get Golden Tate more incorporated in terms of playing time last week, but his playing time has suffered a little bit since the trade in favor of Dallas Goedert, who's a good player. He's been, making at least a couple of catches a week, and I could see him with the Bears defense being so good and minimizing Zach Ertz a little bit. I could see Dallas Goedert being that super cheap tight end option that kind of, gives you a way to be contrarian on this slate. So if I'm really looking at anybody on the Eagles, that's who it is Dallas Goedert. Just because, again, I see those 2 tight end sets and Dallas Goedert getting a ton of playing time because I feel like that's the way the Eagles will feel that they're going to be able to have any success against this unreal Bears defense.
Now, Meaney, Zach Ertz, who an absolute monster, breaks the record for most receptions by a tight end. Over on DraftKings, he is $6,400, and we have 3 games now with Nick Foles and Zach Ertz to close this game, and 2 of them were absolute poop shows for Zach Ertz. There was right in the middle a 12-reception, 110 yards, 2-touchdown game, but that was separated by a 22-yard game and a 15-yard game. Do you have any level of strong confidence spending $6,400 of your salary cap on DraftKings on Zach Ertz?
No, it's really only in the leagues where the 2 lineups that I have where I'm fading Zeke is you can spend up on Ertz, but I mean the team applied total is 16.5. It's by far the lowest this week, and you're right. And that one matchup is against Houston, right? And we're talking about Houston being such a fantasy friendly environment for tight ends. That's why we like Ebron so much. So not so much. I do agree with Ben that Sproles is the way to go. I mean, with the Eagles, when they have trouble running the football, and they will have trouble running the football against the Bears. Have been so strong against the run, and that's where we've seen Sproles have those games recently. Is he steps in for against Houston? That was the one game that stood out to me. Another team that is very strong against the run, so I think you can get by with a little bit of Sproles, maybe. But other than that, man, I'm not spending up for Zach Ertz. No, I like the Goddard pivot. It's interesting. They have been using both of their tight ends a lot lately. This is something that they did a lot last year with Selleck. They had success doing that. Also a third in Trey Burton, who's going to play in this game. But I think the one Eagle that I do have interest in is Nelson Aguilar over on DraftKings, only $3,800 on FanDuel. He's basically the same price as Amari Cooper. Again, FanDuel really sharp with their pricing this week, but Nelson Aguilar, he went through a 5-game stretch where he only had 8 catches. I think there's 3 games in there where he had fewer than 2 fantasy points. And then over the last couple weeks, 13 targets, 10 catches, 156 yards, 3 touchdowns, a high ADOT with Nick Foles in there taking some shots deep down the field with Aguilar. So that is really the only Eagles defense and Aguilar are the only two that I have any interest in.
I can't talk you into Alshon, who the past 3 weeks he's actually been very good. You're talking
he has been.
160, 82, 59 with a touchdown. The disappearance of Zach Ertz has been good for Alshon Jeffrey. I can't talk you into him.
You got a little bit of a revenge narrative in there as well.
You do.
It's just a tournament play. I mean, you mentioned his success recently, 351 yards he has over his last 4 games. So there is the game log is appealing, but again, this coverage defense, it's the number 1 coverage defense in the NFL. So they've just been so strong. It's really it's a tournament play only. And
sure.
I think the way that the Eagles are going to win this game is, if they do, would just be from their defense and a low scoring football game. I don't think there's going to be a lot of points scored. I see honestly a 14-10 game.
All right, let's move it over to the Chicago side of the ball. Ben, Jordan Howard, Tariq Cohen, the enigma of the Chicago Bears running backs, been a little bit hard to decipher over the course of the season. Who are you going with from that tandem?
Yeah, and this is why I'm saying I really see these decisions with the Chicago Bears playing a lot of decisions in who wins money this week, who wins tournaments, because I just think that it sets up for them. And I could see Mitchell Trubisky having a good game, but it's just, I'm not predicting that, especially with their pass catchers. It's so hard. Is it going to be a Trey Burton game? Is it going to be Taylor Gabriel, Anthony Miller, Allen Robinson? I was excited about Allen Robinson earlier in the week when Miller and Taylor Gabriel were dealing with injuries, but they're all practicing in full. They're all going to play. So it's really hard to decipher that passing game. And it's also, as you brought up, Mike, it's hard to decipher this running game as well. But I think doing so is a key to winning money this week, whether it's cash or tournaments. And I'm a Tariq Cohen guy. I love the talent. I love the upside he gives you, especially in the passing game, in PPR scoring formats and DFS. But when you look at what they did this year in terms of volume, and I love volume, Howard ranked 16th in the league in opportunities per game. Cohen is 39th. So Cohen is going to have to do it on efficiency, which he has done plenty of. So great tournament play. And I'm not a big Howard guy, but I'm finding myself liking Jordan Howard a lot this week. They've really been getting him going in the running game lately. He's been scoring rushing touchdowns, 4 touchdowns over the past 3 games. If you go look at his rushing log, 21 carry, 19 carry, 18 carry, he's getting the ball. And again, as you touched on earlier in the podcast, Mike, when I'm predicting who I think is going to have success as a team, that leads me to some of my plays. And because I think the Bears have a lot of success, I think that correlates with Jordan Howard having a good game as well. And the cherry on top is his price, at least on DraftKings, $4,600. It's so cheap. It allows you to play a ton of other studs and play Howard, who could have over 100 yards and a touchdown in this spot.
Talking about the wide receivers, Ben mentioned that all 3 are practicing in full as of Wednesday. Anthony Miller,
I don't know how this.
I don't know how he's going to be playing with that shoulder problem. The Twitter doctors,
in pain on the sideline.
It's kind of all over the place. What's going to happen with Anthony Miller? Will he need a big surgery? Will he not? But his injury actually has me somewhat interested over in Mr. Taylor Gabriel, who you can get him, pretty decently cheap, only $4,500. And the Eagles, it's been better, a lot better as of late. But we have seen them get torched through the air at least a handful of times. And you got to pick somebody. There's not a infinite amount of wide receivers to pick from. So he's at least interesting to me. Fellas, are you ready? Whew, this has been a serious breakdown here. But are you ready to get into your lineups?
Let's do it.
Yes, let's do
it. Here we go.
DFS Battle Royale.
All right, Meaney, we're going to let you start first.
All right, so I got Andrew Luck at the quarterback position. No surprise, I'm rolling out Zeke and Carson at the running back position. I got T.Y. Hilton in there. I have Nelson Aguilar. As of right now, I have DeAndre Carter. Interested in some of the usage that he's got lately. 12 targets in the past 2 games, 10 catches. Eric Ebron at tight end. And, just want to elaborate here on Tariq Cohen in the flex spot for me. I think this is definitely a Cohen game. I mentioned Jordan Hicks coming back and having success stopping the run. The Eagles have allowed the second most catches to running backs. They struggle to stop running backs who can catch. I love the Taylor Gabriel call to you. It's the same thing. These bubble screens, these short little passes, that's where Philadelphia struggles to stop teams. So also allowing the second most receiving yards to running backs as well. So Tariq Cohen is locked in there, and I got the Eagles defense, guys.
Ben, who you got?
I'm also siding with Andrew Luck and then going Zeke and Chris Carson. So we're starting off the same, but then this is where we start to get a little bit different. I cannot see myself fading DeAndre Hopkins at home, all that volume, so good. So I'm going there. I'm going to roll with Dontrell Inman to get some exposure to Luck.
You got to save money somewhere.
Yes, I do. And so I'm going to keep it going with Kiki QT, who, like I said, I see him if he plays. He's in my lineup, and he's right back out there seeing 8-9 targets. Staying on that path with Dallas Goedert, who I talked about, putting Jordan Howard in the flex and finishing it up with the Bears defense.
I think you're right, Ben. I think that Kiki could be that hidden master key.
Yes.
As you head into the weekend, you get the word Kiki is going to be active.
I might even play him in cash.
Yes, I mean, so many targets for that price. So he's very interesting to me. The lineup I went with before the show, Andrew Luck, well, we are really boring at the quarterback position, but just the price and the upside, I think it's there. I paid down at the running back. I went with Kenneth Dixon and Jordan Howard. That allowed me to get DeAndre Hopkins, T.Y. Hilton, and Eric Ebron into my lineup. So then I saved a little bit going with Taylor Gabriel, who I spoke about. Come on, Ben, how do you not have Hot Lockett up in that lineup? You got to get Tyler Lockett there at the flex, and the Baltimore Ravens, who are my favorite defense of the weekend. So there you have it. That's a lot of information for everyone to process. But you got time. You got time because the podcast is out a little bit early. Good luck this weekend. For Ben Cummins, for Chris Meaney, I am your host, Mike, the Fantasy Hitman Wright. We'll see you next week on the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast. Good luck, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Fantasy Footballers DFS Podcast. Don't forget to visit us on the web at www.thefantasyfootballers.com.